Here's something I've been thinking about lately. Everyone wants the finished product, the finished business, the finished success story, the finished relationship. But the most valuable things in life really start perfect. They grow, and often the best investments we can make aren't in finished products, they're in the potential. Hello, and welcome back to Live Full, Retire Early, the podcast, where we build calm wealth, intentional freedom, and lives that we don't need to escape from. We have real conversations with real people, just like you. So if this sounds like your thing, keep on listening. I'm Emma Woodhouse, your host. And today's episode is a bit of a bonus reflection. It's not part of the work optional series that you've been listening to previously, but it's something I watched this weekend that really got me thinking. And the reason I've been thinking about the idea of potential lately is because I watched the Louis Theroux documentary exploring the Manosphere. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the Manosphere is the corner of the internet where conversations around dating, masculinity, status, and relationships have become very loud over the past few years. And the one thing that kept coming up through the entire documentary was this obsession with rankings and status. People constantly talking about 6, 8s, and 10s, reducing people and relationships to something that looks suspiciously like a marketplace. Before I go any further, I want to say something. This episode isn't about bashing men or women. There are plenty of podcasts out there already doing that, and you can find endless hours of content where people sit at opposite sides of the internet shouting at each other about who's to blame. But that's not what I'm doing here today, because I don't think the answer is any of this men versus women. What I'm interested in is something far more useful than that. How we build better lives, how we build better partnerships, and how the exact same principles show up when it comes to money and investing. And sometimes it starts with stepping back and questioning the assumptions we've all been fed about what relationships are supposed to look like. While I was watching the documentary, I kept thinking, this whole conversation feels completely backwards, because it assumes that people are finished products, that someone is either a 6 or a 10 permanently. But we know real life doesn't really work like that. People grow, people evolve, people build themselves over time. Then confidence grows, careers grow, and character grows. The same person at 25 is very rarely the same person at 35. And the person at 35 is very rarely the same person at 45. And that's where the idea for this episode came from. An idea I call Grow Your Own 10. So while watching the documentary, my friend and I kept pausing it like we do and sharing our thoughts. The conversation actually continued the following day over text. And in one of the messages, he said something that really struck a chord within me. He said, "The difference between you and some of these women in that documentary is that you have identified men with potential to become a high-value man and then actively invested in them to become that." So I really reflected upon what he said. And I realised a lot of people are basically waiting at the finish line, trying to pick a winner, instead of being there in the early stages, helping build the winner. And honestly, the more I thought about that message, the more I realised there's quite a lot of truth in it. Because modern dating culture has become incredibly passive, like a lot of things in this world nowadays. A lot of people are sitting there with a long list of requirements, waiting for the finished product to arrive. 6 figures, perfect body, ambitious, confident, successful, has his own house, drives a fancy car. I'm sure you've all seen that viral meme going around as well. You know, the one that goes, "I'm looking for a guy in finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes, finance." Did you feel like you were there then? The internet had a lot of fun with that one. But underneath all the humour, there's actually something quite revealing about it. It perfectly captures the idea of the goal to find the perfect finished product. The already successful guy, the already impressive life, the polished version of someone who has already made it. But here's a slight uncomfortable reality. If someone has already become a 10 in every area of their life, you're not the only one who's noticed. Now that person has options. Lots of options. Now, when I read that message from my friend, I realised it perfectly describes something I've seen play out in real life. And that's the difference between chasing status and investing in potential. Because if everyone is waiting for the finished product, the competition is enormous. Everyone wants the polished version, everyone wants the winner. But if you identify potential early and genuinely support someone's growth, something very different happens. The relationship compounds. And actually, when I thought about it, I realised this is exactly what I have actually done in my own relationships. Both in my current relationship and my previous one, both started very similar. The man told me what he wanted to achieve in life, his ambitions, his goals, the things he wanted to build. And instead of sitting there judging whether he had already achieved those things, I supported in getting him there, encouraging him, backing him, helping make it happen, not sitting on the sidelines, not nagging, not criticising, just believing in the direction they wanted to go and supporting that growth. And I think that's something that's missing from a lot of modern conversations about relationships. People talk endlessly about what they want to receive, but much less about what they're willing to contribute. And this idea actually connects perfectly with something we talk about all the time on this podcast, because it's very similar to how investing works. The best investors don't buy things once they have already reached the top. They look for potential, they invest early, they support the growth, and over time, the returns compound. You don't buy something when it's reached its all-time high. You study the chart, you look for the potential, and you look for where the growth could come from, and then you invest early. And the same idea applies in life. The best relationships, partnerships, and even careers often start before everything looks impressive on the surface. And this idea isn't new. Investors have understood it for decades. Look at Warren Buffett. He built one of the greatest investment track records in history by doing this exact thing. He didn't build his fortune by chasing things that have already looked impressive. He looked for strong fundamentals, long-term potential, and then he invested early and let time do the heavy lifting. Because he understands something most people miss. The real magic happens in compounding. And relationships work in exactly the same way. Two people supporting each other, encouraging each other, and growing together over time. And eventually, you're no longer talking about a 6 or a 10. You're talking about a partnership that has been built. And then the more I thought about this idea, the more I realised this isn't just about dating. It's actually about something bigger. We're living in a culture that has become obsessed with the finished product, the finished business, the finished success story, the finished lifestyle, the finished relationship. Social media has made us very good at seeing the polished end result of someone's life. But what we really see is the years of growth that came from it, the messy middle, the uncertainty, the learning, the building, the compounding. And only when you ever look at the finished product, it becomes very easy to forget everything valuable in life started with potential. And that's why the idea of grow your own 10 is interesting. But then, the more I thought about that, the more I realised there's actually something even more powerful, a more powerful version of grow your own 10. And that is to become your own 10. Because the most attractive thing anyone can do is build a life for themselves, their skills, their confidence, their independence, their purpose, not to impress someone else, but because building yourself is the foundation of a good life. And that is what Live Full Retire Early is all about. Building your life intentionally, building financial independence, building freedom, building options, and becoming someone who is designing their life instead of waiting for life to happen to them. Because when you focus on becoming the best version of yourself, something amazing happens. You stop obsessing about finding the perfect person, and you start attracting people who are also growing, people who are also building something with their lives. So maybe the goal isn't to find a 10, and maybe it isn't even to grow one. Maybe the real goal is to become someone worth building a life with. Because the best things in life really start perfect. They start with potential, then they grow, and then they compound. And everyone wants that finished product, and very few people want to invest in the potential. But the people who do are actually the ones who end up building the most extraordinary lives. And the interesting thing is, this principle doesn't just apply to relationships, it applies to almost everything in life. The businesses that succeed, the careers that flourish, and the lives that feel meaningful, they all started the same way. Someone saw potential and decided to invest in it. Anyway, those are just a few reflections after watching the Louis Theroux documentary. I'd love to hear what you thought, and you can always message me over on Substack where the conversation will continue. And if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who might find it useful. Leave me a juicy 5-star review, hit the follow button, do all the lovely things. And until next time, keep building calm wealth, intentional freedom, and a life you don't need to escape from. Bye bye.